Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs, numerous podcasts, his work on Cover 32, Cold Omaha, and he is a useful human and Case Keenum hater, Arif Hassan. Arif, how are you doing?
I'm good, James. How are you?
I don't know yet. I slipped on the ice and dropped on my back on the way into the house tonight. So I'm at that point where I'm not entirely sure if everything is kind of like, after you land and they say, contents may have shifted during flight. Like I'm kind of waiting to see what the fallout of this is going to be.
Okay, maybe you'll have an organ like somewhere up in your rib cage where it's not supposed to be, and you didn't know about it till 3 days later.
It's entirely possible. Like all of a sudden, I'm going to find that electric toothbrush and like, oh hey there, I'm a fat guy and I admit it, but and so there's a fair amount of cushion that happened on the fall, but I fell on the steps, so I have a feeling right now I'm just operating on adrenaline, and when I wake up in the morning, it's just going to be death.
Oh, yeah, no, that's how that works, actually. That's true.
Probably. And with that, welcome to this week's show. I can actually say this week's show because we're only going to put out one this week because we've got a little bit to go over, but we don't have a game to preview thanks to the fact that we are the #2 seed. So instead, we have all sorts of things to talk about. We're going to review the last 2 games, actually. We're going to talk a little bit about the Packers game, a little bit about the Bears game. We're going to talk about the Case Keenum article that has gotten a lot of attention and a lot of interesting tweets towards my co-host here. We're also going to be going over the NFC North coaches that were fired and the one who didn't that probably deserved it. And we are also going to do some preview of the playoffs and some mailbag. So lots of stuff that we can cover. Before we get started, however, it is important to note that we are ad-free. We do not advertise other products. We are ad-free. So if you enjoy the show, if you would like to continue the tradition of us being ad-free and making sure that the only spiel you hear is us thanking you so much for donating, you can donate to us at patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode. And we do have a donation to mention real quick. Another Patreon donation over to Justin Martin. Thank you, Justin. That does put you into the range of the free sticker, which Dusty will send to you. And this week, he will not be allowed to have a terrible pun. Which we are all thankful for. Or at least I am. That was awful. Post haste. That's tragic. Oof. But again, if you would like to donate to the show, if you enjoy it and would just like to say, thanks you guys, we really do appreciate it, send it out. You can even, if you don't feel like donating, if you would just like to share the word of Norse Code, you can get one of our bumper stickers, or you can also just send the link to a friend. Be like, hey, this is a cool thing. Mention it on the Vikings subreddit. We've seen it a couple of times. We used to post there all the time, actually. Just, spread the word. We've got a great team. We've got great content. That's all we ask. So again, thank you guys so much. We couldn't have done what we did last year without you guys, and we have all sorts of cool things planned for this year. So let's keep up the good work. All of that aside, let's talk briefly about the Green Bay and Chicago games. And I feel like the first thing we need to mention when we talk about those games was the play of Harrison Smith and Anthony Barr.
Yeah, so I tweeted out that both Harrison Smith and Anthony Barr had perfect or near perfect games, especially against Chicago. And it turns out, I think Pro Football Focus give Harrison Smith the highest grade, individual game grade that they've given a safety for Harrison Smith in that game. And as a result, I think consequently, Pro Football Focus ended up giving him the highest grade that they've ever given any safety, and the 5th highest grade they've given any player to any position over the past. They've done retroactive grading all the way back to 2005. So let's say the past 13 years, which is just amazing, right? And this game I think is a pretty big reason why. And the thing that makes Harrison Smith so phenomenal is that he's lined up at basically every defensive position on the field. And that includes, like, he's been an edge rusher too. And so the only position he hasn't played is defensive tackle, which I'm okay with that. And in this game, he kind of did the same thing. He lined up at linebacker, free safety. He played in the slot as a cornerback. I think he lined up wide out wide once. He blitzed off the edge, and he had to take on a tackle, not just a running back. In pass protection, he took on a tight end in pass protection later too. And he kept on winning his snaps. He did a really good job of being really effective and forceful in the run game. He was phenomenal in coverage, and he did a really good job kind of figuring out sort of everything. In the show notes, I'll put a link to this piece by, I think his name is Nicholas Olson, and I'm pretty confident he's the world on Reddit. Either way, it's a really good piece on Harrison Smith that kind of outlines all of these things that I'm talking about. And in this game, specifically, Smith did all of those things, including kind of like identifying what the offense was doing after the motion and alerting the defense to kind of what was happening, what they needed to do. But yeah, he was perfect. He didn't miss a tackle. He didn't miss a spot in coverage. He was awesome. Then, of course, Anthony Barr, I think he had one of his best games of the season, if not his best. Well, actually, I think he had his best game of the season. And I mentioned that he might actually be having the best game of his career. Someone mentioned, of course, his game against Atlanta where he had the rundown fumble, where, maybe that's a pretty good candidate for being better than this game. But, regardless, Anthony Barr had a phenomenal game as well. And, he did, kind of the normal things you expect a linebacker having a good game to do. He didn't miss a tackle and all that. But what's really nice about him, as say compared to last year, which is really good contrast, is he kind of identified, what he needed to do really quickly and moved directly off of the snap. One of the things that I really like about Eric Kendricks that Anthony Barr didn't always do is that Kendricks would be moving at the snap. He already has an idea of where he wants to go, and he's already going there. In this game, I think Barr kind of demonstrated that he has the ability to do that, to read an offense and figure out where he needs to go. And then one of the things that both Kendricks and Barr have struggled with is kind of getting off of blocks and squeezing lanes and stuff like that. And Barr didn't have a problem with that in this game at all. In fact, he caused a couple of tackles by squeezing blockers into running lanes. So yeah, they both had really phenomenal games, and they were a big part of what the Vikings did against the Bears.
The Packers game specifically, when you watch the All-22, it was just amazing to just see how he was playing. Because I ended up watching the All-22 and just watching Harrison Smith, which was actually really fun to kind of figure out like the little nuances of where he was lining up and where he was kind of moving, or if he was going to move into like a corner spot, or for one of the interceptions, the final play. The final interception, how just Huntley just, God, I was so frustrated for him.
Right, yeah. He plays like that where you want him to play poorly and lose because you're cheering for the other team, but he's playing so frustratingly bad that you can't just. You're just like, you could do better than that. Come on, man. Well,
it's like it's like the last couple of games where it seems like on fourth down, the quarterback decides they're going to try to pick on Xavier Rhodes.
Right.
Like, really? That's become a thing. Like, that might as well be a meme at this point. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. It certainly didn't make any sense in the Chicago game, where you just sat there like, really? That's who you went to? That was your. It felt a bit like Ghostbusters, where like that was your move, get her, that was it.
Right, exactly.
Like, let's just throw it at one of the best corners in the league. This couldn't possibly go wrong. Oh, it was broken up, and now the game's over. Oh, they're kneeling now.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing because that's also basically what happened in the Bears game too, except they threw it at Harrison, who ended up getting the final interception on fourth down of all things. Or I guess it wasn't an interception. It was in the Green Bay game. The final interception on fourth down. You're just like, what?
Right.
Wait,
that guy has been owning you all game long. Yes. Let's throw. He's apparently going to be covering as a corner now. Let's see how this works. And like the pass, like the wide receiver fell down a bit on that, but he fell down before the throw.
Right, exactly.
And it
So
was
why were you doing that?
There's no way that he would throw to me. He can see I'm already on the ground. I'm not even going to bother quickly getting up. Oh no.
Oh no.
Harrison Smith already has the ball.
Yeah, it was a pretty stunningly bad game, and one thing that is also worth pointing out is I thought Trey Waynes did really well, especially against the Bears.
Especially against the Bears.
Yeah, he was really just astounding. I think he ended up with officially 2 pass deflections and a tackle for loss. And it's kind of telling that like his worst play of the game was like a missed tackle, which like if that's what's happening, then he's probably having a good game. I mean, the one thing that he's been consistently good at the entire year has been tackling and run defense. And he ends up having a tackle for loss in this game anyway. So it's not as if that was a particular weakness in this game. He had a really astounding game. If he plays at that level, all year next year or all throughout the playoffs, the Vikings are in a really good spot because there's not a receiver unless you've got like this devastating slot threat, which, I guess, you could say the Saints probably have that and the Patriots kind of habitually have that. But just generally speaking, if you take away the top 2 receivers, with Xavier Rhodes on one side and, Trey Waynes maybe playing at that level on the other side, it's going to be really difficult for any team to be able to throw the ball. So, really astounding game. Great way for him to kind of finish the season. And one thing, I just think in general for the defense and a little bit of the offense too, is that, one thing that was kind of worrying me is that, all 3 of these final games are against teams that don't have anything to play for, period. And the Vikings, in this game, they didn't really have much to play for either because it would take kind of like sort of a catastrophic series of events for them not to get the bye. And obviously they controlled their destiny. If they won, they won. But they're against teams that, for the most part, they didn't even look like they were trying in the second half, especially, of course, the Bengals. The Bears, it felt like they kind of stopped trying a little bit, but not quite. I mean, they still had like some trick plays and stuff. And the Packers, it really felt like the game was competitive, but the Packers weren't. I don't know. But the thing is, the thing is, the Vikings were really hyped up to play all of these games. And, I don't really talk about, players' emotions or momentum or stuff all that often because I think it's difficult to quantify. You don't want to read into body language too much. It's very easy to fall into like unprovable cliches and stuff like that. But I think in this game, it is pretty clear that the Vikings were super amped up to be beating up on this like terrible 5-11 Chicago Bears team and securing the second seed and securing that first bye, which is really nice to see because, you always worry, that, maybe they won't have enough motivation for them to be able to kind of carry the kind of energy they need to finally be kind of amped up for the first game of the playoffs, because 3 games where teams are really not that competitive plus a bye, and you've essentially got 4 weeks where you haven't needed to play your best football in order to get somewhere. And if momentum is real, or if game to game kind of, energy translates, if that's a thing, and to some extent, I think it probably is, even if you can't measure it a lot of the time. If that is the case, then the Vikings are kind of not in a ton of trouble because a bye is a free, win, but maybe they'll have some difficulty playing up to their opponent because the NFC has this really devastating slate of really, really good teams. If they were in the AFC, I wouldn't care, right? They'd be up against like the friggin' Chiefs or whatever, right? That would be kind of a good sort of starter team to get back into the game. But your first introduction into really competitive football is going to be, maybe it's going to be the Saints or the Panthers who beat you once, right? It's going to be like a pretty good team.
It's weird to say, but with the exception of the Giants team that knocked off the undefeated Patriots, teams that win or go to Super Bowls win games like this. Like they win the games they're supposed to be winning, and that's what we did all year. The only teams that beat us were ourselves. We look at if we look at the losses against the Steelers. Highly penalized. We beat ourselves and put ourselves in a situation of taking us out of the game. We easily could have we could have won that game. The Detroit game, that was a mess. That was tons of penalties. We did that to ourselves. Carolina, a series of just unfortunate events happen, and we cannot get out of our way. We lose that game.
Yeah, I find it kind of interesting. There's a couple of games they could point to on the schedule where the Vikings have been pretty sloppy. They committed a lot of penalties. I think was it the Bengals game? They also committed a lot of penalties, but it didn't matter because Bengals. But
that was supposed to be Marvin Lewis's swan song, and, and apparently he got brought back for a 2-year encore. So.
Yeah, he's like, I'm thinking about retiring. I think, is 2-year extension? Yes, excellent. But
I do need a new breakfast nook. Okay, let's.
Yeah, right. But yeah, and there have been a couple of games this year that have been notable for how many penalties it feels like, the Vikings committed, and I think kind of fairly so, right? I mean, there's a couple of games here and there where you could say, the refs either, were calling things slightly in another team's favor. Like I think the Washington's a pretty good example. And, one game where, now I don't even remember which game it was, one game where it felt like the officiating was pretty egregious.
I think you were referring to the Detroit game in which we won.
Yeah, it has to be the Detroit game, yeah.
Defiance of the refs.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. But for the most part, it really feels like, there's all these games where the Vikings committed a lot of penalties. But you look it up, you go to NFLpenalties.com, which is one of my favorite sites for these kinds of statistics because they go through the trouble of logging it. The Vikings are still one of the least penalized teams in the league, which is kind of astounding to me. It doesn't match my perception. And the reason that's the case is probably because under Zimmer, the Vikings just haven't been penalized that much. You go back to 2014, 2015, 2016, the Vikings are just continuously one of the least penalized teams in the league. And so these games really stick out to us because we're just not used to seeing it anymore, which is really refreshing, right? Because the Vikings had average to above average penalty rates with Frazier and Childress, and now under Zimmer, they really don't commit that many penalties. And when you think about it, 2016, you'd expected them to have committed a lot of penalties because that offensive line, the only way they were going to stop anyone was by holding, right? But, and they committed their fair share of false starts in 2016 too. But just generally speaking, this is a team that doesn't commit a ton of penalties. And so I do have some kind of confidence going into the playoffs. Like you mentioned, the 3 games that they lost, are games that, and the Detroit game, obviously, they were kind of shook by losing Dalvin Cook. The games that they lost, if they had kind of been at their sort of normal penalty rate, would have been a lot more competitive. I don't know if they would have won that Pittsburgh game otherwise, but you really feel like you could craft a game where with fewer penalties, the Vikings, would have won the Carolina game for sure, right? And so you take a look at those games where they've been kind of really not playing up to their level, and if a lot of the reasoning has to do with the amount of penalties that they committed, well, they're probably not going to commit that many more penalties, especially if they've got a home game coming up. We know that traditionally teams don't commit that many penalties at home versus on the road, whether that's because of ref bias or home field or they're more comfortable or whatever. But they commit fewer penalties at home. And the Vikings, it seems like that's particularly the case. So, yeah, I mean, if that's if that's what's been kind of one of the bigger problems for the Vikings in games where they've been a lot less competitive or games that they've lost, you have to feel a little bit confident going into the playoffs, sort of from that perspective.
Another player I wanted to bring up was Latavius Murray, who's continuing to just have moments of just brilliance, just feasting on some of these terrible defenses. And the Bears' defense isn't terrible, but he was just cutting out chunks of yardage for himself all game, including at the very end of the game to ice it, to block off for more than 10 yards each time to be able to finish off the game. Latavius is a big reason why we are in the position we are.
Yeah, and if you're kind of indicated, I was very, very positive about Latavius when he was performing pretty poorly statistically. And one of the things that's really nice about the way he's played this year is that it actually doesn't resemble a lot of the problems that he had, especially in his final year in Oakland. He's a huge back. I think he ran a 4.37 or 4.38 at the combine at 220 some pounds. And he's 6'3". He's a big guy, especially for a running back. And you kind of expect a guy like that to be able to power through tackles and be pretty good after contact. And aside from literally at the goal line where he's pretty effective for Oakland, he wasn't doing a lot of that. He wasn't lowering his shoulder. And while he still kind of runs upright for the Vikings, he's been doing just a fantastic job after contact with Minnesota. And so it's really nice to see. And like you said, in these past couple of games, he's really been a huge asset in icing out games, extending drives, getting first downs. And then every so often he'll just break off a 10 or 12 yard run on 1st and 10. And it's just like a free down. It's really nice. And a lot of that has to do with, how good the blocking sometimes has been, especially with Pat Elflein, who I think has been improving over the season. But a lot of it, I just think Latavius is doing a pretty good job, and he's showing a kind of shiftiness it's really kind of unusual to see in a guy so obviously like big for his position, but also just really nice because it still like throws defenders off.
Oh, absolutely. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about Case Keenum. How has he done the last 2 games?
It depends on like kind of what context you view him as. If you view him as a backup who's kind of thrust into this position, he's done pretty phenomenally, right? But if you view him as a guy who is your starter, which he is, going into the playoffs, I think there's a lot of reasons for concern, which has been kind of like the big thing that people have been talking about, or people in response to an article I wrote. I shouldn't say that like, oh, this conversation was in the ether, and as if I didn't like contribute to the existence of this conversation. But
yeah, it's not like we've spent the last however number of weeks on this show basically arguing the same thing, that Keenum's getting bailed out by his receivers. Keenum probably isn't necessarily sustainable, but this is amazing what's continuing, and it's kind of hard to stop him at this point.
Right, yeah, and I totally understand the Vikings, continuing to commit to starting him and stuff like that. A bunch of people have asked me like, okay, hey, you think Keenum's like, his level of play is not sustainable. Kind of what's your solution? And my solution is I don't have a solution. Sometimes I'm just pointing out a weakness, right? And I don't think that there's anything that the Vikings can reasonably be expected to do. And the reason that there's no solution is I think the Vikings boxed themselves in. If they had given, much more substantial playing time to Teddy Bridgewater, then we'd have a better answer to that question. And, maybe it could be the case that Bridgewater is just not playing well and he hasn't knocked the rust off, or he's just never going to be the level as he was, or maybe he's going to be at the level as he was, but actually that just wasn't that good. And we were kind of viewing that the wrong way. Either way, if that's the case, then yeah, start Keenum. But for now, we don't have a solution, and I think part of that is because of the Vikings. Sometimes, kind of very reasonably so. Like there wasn't a spot in the Packers game where it made sense, I think, to play Bridgewater. But sometimes I think kind of unreasonably so. I think kind of in the middle of the season, it made sense to just give Bridgewater a couple of starts. They did it for Sam Bradford after Case Keenum came off of like a career game. So like it's not that difficult to justify it. But as the wins kept rolling in, it kept on getting kind of harder to argue, even as I think Keenum had actually kind of gotten worse, because he had this really good mid-game or mid-season stretch, kind of excluding the second half of the Washington game, where you can include the second half, like starting in the second half of the London game against the Browns, going kind of all the way, I think one game past the Rams game. I'm trying to remember what game that was. I'll probably just look up a schedule right now. But if you include kind of the Rams game and into the Lions game, that's it. He had this really great stretch, and he also had some pretty good flashes. I think right before the bye week too, where he was doing a better job of doing the kind of things that kind of bothered me about him early in the season, because he was doing a pretty poor job of leading receivers into throws. He was doing a pretty poor job of kind of identifying which receiver to throw to. And in the middle of the season, he was actually doing all of those things. And I mentioned it in a podcast. I mentioned it in a bunch of podcasts over the course of those weeks, and saying, if he can sustain this level of play, this is kind of what it looks like, because he's doing a better job at things like ball placement and managing pressure in the pocket. Obviously, he had a bunch of highlights where he did a really good job of avoiding sacks and stuff like that. And even in the Falcons game, he had, a bunch of highlight points where he's avoiding sacks. Then also in the Falcons game, a bunch of highlight points where just a bunch of sacks happened. There were parts of his game that, like, I think when you look at him, you can point to him and say, these are the kind of things that you want to see as genuine improvement from a quarterback. These are the kind of things that a quarterback can take with them into the playoffs, and you can kind of trust them. But the problem is those things kind of fell off. And so you take a look at the Falcons game, the Panthers game, the Bengals game, and in the Packers game, and a little bit into the Bears game. That's a solid stretch of games, right? That's 5 games and over 100 throws where, that kind of disappeared a little bit. And we even saw it a little bit, of course, in the Lions game too. And in order to be fair to him, I included so this article that I wrote, I included basically half of that stretch. So I started from week 12, which I think is the Washington game. So I included half of that stretch where he was playing, where I thought genuinely better in terms of like on tape stuff. And I was looking at sort of what are the kind of the markers for success. And I actually kind of regret not putting this next statistic into the article because people keep bringing it up. But Keenum, actually the entire year, but especially since week 12, has been really poor on 3rd and long. Like people talk about how he's a really good 3rd down quarterback, and the Vikings are 3rd or something in the NFL on offense in converting 3rd downs. And that's true. I think that if you look at Keenum on 3rd and intermediate, he's an above average in terms of like, first down rate. He's performed at an above average rate there. On 3rd and short, he's performed at an above average rate there. But I don't put a lot of stock into a quarterback performing well on 3rd and short, just because it's replaceable, especially when you've got a back like Latavius Murray playing as well as he did, and as well as he has. So that's like not that important. And the distinctions between like the best quarterbacks on 3rd and short and the worst quarterbacks on 3rd and short are just like not that big. But on 3rd and long, he's been really bad, like 29%. Whereas some of these top level quarterbacks are converting at like a 40%, 45% clip. And like that was kind of my first sort of, thought that maybe the stuff I'm seeing kind of in games and on film, maybe that is actually translating into some of these deeper statistics because, we see he's like 3rd in ESPN's QBR, he's like 7th in passer rating, 8th in adjusted net yards per attempt, but what happens if you take a look at, what to me looks like a drop off in play and take a look at some of these deeper statistics, it's kind of bothersome. Like one of the things that was kind of a big mark of his play in the first half of the season was how aggressive he's been and how far he's throwing the ball downfield and how often he's completing those passes downfield and how that's really kind of enabled an explosive offense for the Vikings. The second half of the season, he's actually 29th of 34 quarterbacks in deep ball accuracy rate, and he's throwing the deep ball a lot less. When he is throwing the deep ball, it's a lot less effective. And it's kind of resulted in kind of an inversion in what he's done. So midway through the season, when I said, hey, you should bench Case for Teddy Bridgewater, was because he was doing a really poor job of creating yards after the catch for his receivers. Now he's exclusively relying on yards after the catch to receivers. And I don't think he's actually enabling it very well. It's kind of this weird thing where I think like 45% of his yards since week 12 have come from after catch work from the receivers. But I think he's doing a pretty poor job putting the ball in the right spot to generate that yards after the catch. You can take a look at, for example, that interception where he threw it to Stephon Diggs like 8 feet above his head, and Diggs had to bounce up to get it, and it turned into an interception. Whether or not you think that interception's on Keenum or not, you can pretty easily recognize that it was a really, really poor throw. And we actually saw a bunch of high throws on screen passes that have really limited the yards after the catch, and the receivers have had to kind of overcome these big things. And I think I mentioned in last week's, or not last week, because, well, did we have a show last week at all?
We had the clip show.
Okay.
And then you and Dusty attempted to record a show, and instead of Dusty's laptop being the issue, it turned out that yours was the enemy combatant.
Yeah, and we tried like 3 different, we tried Skype and Google Hangouts and Zencaster. Nothing worked. No. But so 2 weeks ago, I mentioned that the issue with using kind of yak percentage or yards after catch percentage in terms of determining, what matters for a quarterback is that the extremes are kind of where you have to worry. And before I was talking about, Keenan was actually at the bottom of the league in generating yards after the catch for quarterbacks early in the season. And it's because he was creating a lot of contested catches. He was putting the ball in really poor spots for his receivers, kind of leading them into defenders instead of leading them away from defenders. And that was really the problem. And now we're at a point where it's the opposite, where he's at the other extreme. And it's because I think they've taken, essentially by play calling, they've taken the responsibility and the ball basically out of his hands. And so now it's a bunch of really short throws that no matter what is going to generate a lot of yards after the catch. And that's where a bulk of his passing yardage is coming from. And so the criticism is kind of inverted, which I think is kind of funny. Someone actually pointed that out, not very kindly, that I was being a hypocrite because
not very kindly, as if any of the feedback from this article has been negative has been done in a kind way.
I mean, I've had reasonable discussions with people. I just I don't tend to quote tweet the ones I'm having reasonable discussions with.
No, and you did say that your New Year's resolution was to get into more Twitter arguments. So
right, yeah,
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, right. But someone was pointing out I can't. You wrote that Case Keenum couldn't generate any yak, and now you're saying that he can generate yak, and I'm like, well. Yeah, if you let me explain myself, there is a resolution to this contradiction.
There's a difference between what you did and then saying something along the lines of Case Keenum couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat.
Yeah, right, exactly. And the issue is that he was hitting, two ends of the extremes, and both are bad. And if you can't find a middle ground, then you're creating a one-dimensional offense that teams can kind of game plan against, which I think is kind of partially what happened and why the Vikings reeled back on throwing deep passes and relied a lot more on these short passes that inevitably generate yards after the catch and are therefore a big part of his total passing yardage. And so you're creating just a different kind of, I think, one-dimensional offense now. And that, kind of worries me. You go up against a team that's really good at tackling, the Saints team, is a pretty good example of that. Then you're not going to get a good offense out of these short throws that rely on receivers kind of doing kind of all of the extra work with the ball in their hands. And so, that's, one of my concerns. And I think that kind of encapsulates a lot of it. But just generally speaking, you can kind of see on film kind of what the issue is, which is that he's got a lot of really inaccurate throws, especially over the past 3 weeks, but certainly over the course of the past 6 weeks, where the ball placement has been very poor. I think that a lot of the passes he's throwing are kind of begging to be intercepted. And so I think that he's thrown, I think, 4 interceptions over that span of time. And defenders have, quote unquote, should have gotten 7 interceptions, and 9 if you count the 2 defensive pass interference throws from the Bears. And I think it's probably fair to count them. I think it's a little less obvious, but I think it's fair to count them. And then there was another one I didn't count against the Lions, where I think the linebacker should have gotten a pick 6 if he had his head turned around, but he didn't even get his finger on the ball. So it's kind of difficult to just say, consequently, that absolutely should have been an interception, but to only end up with 4 interceptions in a period where there were 15 potential interception opportunities caused by the quarterback. I think that's unusually lucky. And someone pointed out, or Arif, if you're not giving us the rate of how often quarterbacks tend to get their interceptions dropped, you're not really making a very compelling argument. And I think that's pretty fair. But I've kind of 2 responses. One's kind of in the article, which is, we had pointed this out when we saw the same thing happen with Christian Ponder, and it caught up to him basically immediately. He had 4 games where he didn't throw, I think, a single interception, but he had 6 dropped interceptions. And then they came back to bite him, really quickly, over the course of the next 4 games, actually. In fact, he was actually unusually unlucky over the next 4 games. It was like the bastard of the law of averages coming back. And here's adjustment to the mean. Yeah, right. Yes, it was. It sucked as a Vikings fan to watch. But generally speaking, it kind of depends on what you count as a should be interception. So of course, and this is all subjective. I'm totally willing to acknowledge that, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It's more difficult to kind of prove your argument in a subjective environment, which I'm totally comfortable with. The thing is, if you take a look at sort of how how so Keenan Fay is somebody who tracks interceptable throws, and Pro Football Focus is another organization that tracks interceptable throws. They're very, I think, kind to Keenum. They say that he's only had he ranks like the 6th best in the NFL in terms of turnover worthy passes. And I asked them about it, and like it's the same definition that they have for a wide receiver drop. Which I think that's fair because it creates kind of like a congruency in their definitions. It's like a defensive back has to actually like drop the ball, which out of the examples I think I showed in the article, I think maybe happened twice, maybe 3 times out of the 7 passes that I thought were interceptable. And so I can kind of see why, their rate is so low. But to me, I think that most defenses most of the time will intercept that. And so I'm kind of closer to what Keenan Fay's definition of an interceptable pass, which is most defenses most of the time will intercept that. And he's found over the past 3 years that about 50 to 60% of interceptable passes are actually caught by the defense, which is, pretty low. But that's still higher than what Keenum had to deal with. And you can say, one of those interceptions wasn't his fault. The Diggs one I just kind of referenced earlier happened in that 6-7 week stretch that we've been talking about. But I am not as confident that it's not his fault. But even if you wanted to, chalk it up as an unlucky interception, then he's only had 3 interceptions in say 11 or 14 interceptable opportunities. That's still unusually low. You should have had 3 more interceptions over that span. By that count, maybe 4 or 5 more interceptions just in general. And so 5 more interceptions, that's a lot. 5 interceptions that he should have had, or maybe only 3 interceptions that he should have had. That's tough. Like I still think that's well below average. That's much luckier than average. And so to only have, 25 to 30% of your interceptable passes actually intercepted, if you look at Keenan Fay's tables, that's like top 5 luckiest type of stuff. And so, that's a fair criticism that it didn't like fully put it out there. My editor was actually asking me to cut it down to 2,500 words, and some of that's kind of what I cut out, which I still only got to 3,000. So, oops.
But you tried. That's what's important.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's all that matters. Just like Case, you tried. Yeah. So full marks. So that's one of my worries. And just generally speaking, I think he's missing opportunities, which I think address this criticism. Some people are like, well, you can look at Tom Brady's throws and say, hey, he missed this guy that's wide open. And I addressed that in the article. You could do that for every quarterback. I think I even said that verbatim. You do that for every quarterback. The issue is, why is it happening? Is it repeatable? What kind of problem is it? If a defensive back slips down and a guy just gets wide open and the quarterback misses it, that sucks. But that's not necessarily a repeatable problem because that quarterback is throwing to his first read, and that's the nature of how read progression works. If your first read is open, you throw it to your first read. Duh. Like that's the whole point of having progressions. But to me, the problem is Case is often throwing at his first read when his first read is not open and his second read is friggin' wide open. So that's a problem. The second is that how one designates the first read in a progression is not as simple as this is what the playbook says, because the quarterback very often has to figure out what his progression is based on the defense that he thinks he's seeing. And so sometimes, especially in the college level, and certainly, very often in the NFL level, that just means figuring out kind of which half of the offense to throw to. So one side is going to have one route package, another side is going to have another route package, and typically one of those sides will be good against a particular flavor of defenses, and the other side will be good against a different flavor of defenses. And generally, that's going to cover kind of 90% of the cases that a quarterback is going to see. And so if they correctly identify pre-snap what that defense is, their first read, if they're open, is going to be maybe one of the better plays to make. And I think he doesn't do that. And I think we see that a lot. So the interception he threw against Carolina, the near interception he threw against Cincinnati, and I think the third time it was either against the Lions or the Packers, near interception. It was the same friggin' thing, the same interception, essentially, on the same route 3 times, where he misread the coverage, didn't see the safety coming down, and threw to it was actually almost always Thielen. And sometimes it's kind of an underthrow, but just generally speaking, against the coverage, it's a bad throw because you're essentially throwing into double coverage because the safety has a ton of time to get there because it's like cover one, it's in man coverage, and the safety is already shaded to that side. And because of the route Thielen is running, someone else, just by the nature of the route combination, is going to be wide open. And he not only misses the wide open person, he friggin' throws an interception. And like that's been happening consistently, and that's it. Sometimes, it's like a corner route that's designed to beat cover two, but only cover two zone, not cover two man. And he throws it as if it's cover two zone when it's cover two man. And so you've got that cornerback right there. But the corner route works really well to open up the guy kind of underneath and corner flat combination or something like that. And that guy's wide open. He doesn't throw to that guy. And so he is throwing the wrong routes against the wrong coverages. And so that's a problem too. And so those are the kinds of things that, I think kind of pop out when you're taking a look at, if you're missing a guy wide open, why is he missing this guy who's wide open? If he's the second read and you were correct in diagnosing who you need to read, then fine, no problem, that happens. If you should have been reading this guy first or reading this half of the field, then that is a problem. So those are kinds of the things that I wanted to get to. And then, there's some criticisms that I think are also fair. Like someone mentioned that they thought that the conservativeness of Keenum over the past couple of weeks has been dictated by a couple of things. One thing, the weather, which is really only useful in talking about the Green Bay game, honestly. And I think I'm talking about a 6-week stretch. And so I think to isolate the Green Bay game as one that was unusually conservative because of the weather, I think really misses that I'm looking over like a 6 or 7 week sample. The second is game planning. And I think that that's a pretty good argument, say, in the Falcons game. So one of the things, we mentioned this actually in the review of the Falcons game, that especially in the second half, Sherman kind of adjusted to throw short against a cover 3 defense where they're really going to leave the flats wide open. That's fine. That makes sense. But these defenses are like not the same. In fact, the Panthers defense is a different style of zone defense that really does aggressively attack those short throws, and he was still throwing them short. And in fact, it very often leaves kind of these deeper throws not wide open, but kind of they're more vulnerable, and he didn't throw those deeper throws. So I think it's fair to say that about the Falcons game. It's fair to talk about the weather in the Packers game, but these are kind of isolated incidents where it's not true throughout the course of the sample, and he's still throwing less often deep, and he's just not good at throwing it deep, and he should have thrown a couple more interceptions than he did. And so, those are kinds of the things that that I'm talking about in the article, that some people have, respectfully a lot of times have criticized. And then there's like some people who like tell me to go back to Somalia, a country I've like never been to or have no genetic like at all. Yeah. Brown is brown. That's what he's trying to say. It's like this guy who's telling me to go back to Somalia. He lives in Minnesota, which to me presumably means you've seen, a Somali person, but I guess not. But like my Twitter avatar and consequently me, I also do not look Somali at all. Like, the me. That's that might as well just be like your title for a while. The Me by Arif. Yeah, right.
So we at least know what your autobiography is going to be named.
The Me.
The Me by Arif. Or that's like your fragrance.
Oh, that's good. I like that. I don't know if anyone would want to buy an
smell. Anybody would like to smell like Arif? Is that what you're trying to...
Well, I mean, I smell fine.
It smells like hot takes and just anger.
Well, okay, so I also just don't get this in general, why like athletes have colognes branded to them, because to me it's like I don't want to smell like LeBron James after a game. Like that's like, I'm sure he's like
you want to smell like his brand. That's what you want to do. You want to smell like his brand, and that's why you buy the LeBron James or the whatever.
Right.
That sort of cologne is marketed toward that 18 to 22-year-old like sect that don't know any better.
That's true too. Yeah, it's kind of like Beats headphones.
Exactly. They're like, oh, this will be cool. All right, this will work. And then like they'll meet a girl at a party and go, why? What are you wearing? What
what is this?
What died on you? Like, do you need a shower? Like, ugh. So anyway, as we careen off that particular ledge, there was there used to be this Twitter account that Bomani Jones had for years. It was called @HaterGalaga, and people would just send the meanest things they could to him, and he would just come in and he would do it professionally. He would look at their account. He'd be looking for anything for Facebook or anything like any other post, and would just destroy them. And that was part of the game. He was Hater Galaga. He would just occasionally sign on, toss himself in there, and call it good. And it was a game for some of us. And God, I don't think he signed into Hater Galaga in a few years. So sadly, this has kind of come to an end. But the tweets that have come as a result of this, and I think it was Yinka's article.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah, it's felt a bit like that.
The same thing.
No, Yinka's article was clickbait, if anything.
Yeah, right. I even called him out on it. I was like, Yinka, this is your fault for this like purposefully misleading title. Like, you idiot, what you expect?
You were riling up the locals. That's what you were doing. Anybody will tell you don't mess with the tradespeople. They don't find humor.
Yeah, right. But yeah, no, we've been getting a lot of hate.
It's been Hater Galaga around here. It's been fun. Let's talk about the NFC North coaches that were fired this week, and let's mention the one that didn't, that probably deserved it. So in the but everybody else around him seems to be on too. So the Lions fired. John Fox fired. Don Capers fired. McCarthy extended.
Ted Thompson resigned-ish.
Well, I believe Eric Thompson was the one who put out the tweet that Ted Thompson's being sent off to a farm to romp and have plenty of space to roll around in the dirt and be. The things I was reading on the Packers subreddit, because I'm an idiot and decided to go onto the Packers subreddit to kind of take the pulse of what they were thinking about the resignation. Let's just call it the flat out firing of Dom Capers.
That sounds like a really good like documentary title.
The flat out firing
of Dom Capers. It's like the assassination of Gianni Versace. Like, it's just got the right amount of syllables. And I don't know, it's like the flat out firing of Dom Capers. The flat out
firing of Dom Capers. There's an episode title for you. But just like getting their pulse, and everybody was to a person was like, yeah, boy, the game just passed him by. That's what happened. The game passed him by. The work he did with Charles Woodson was amazing, but just he just couldn't adjust to the new NFL. And I'm sitting there just going, boy, you think you'd be saying that about him over the last few years, wouldn't you? Like, that Green Bay defense hasn't been good in years.
Yeah, it's been a bit. It was all right in 2010. They ended up coming away with a Super Bowl, so that helped. But it's always been like a turnover dependent defense, because it's always given up like yards and touchdowns, and when it's been good, it's only been because Charles Woodson has been ungodly at generating turnovers.
It's only been good when Charles Woodson was there. Let's just put a bookend.
Right, so Dom Capers was a genius, obviously.
Yeah, clearly, and Ted Thompson was a genius for making sure that he was able to sign him.
All right. Excellent.
So now that that's all wrapped up, and as it turns out, they're cleaning house in Green Bay. Quarterbacks coach is gone. Like,
yeah, I just feel like if you get like what I think they've gotten rid of 6 coaches, maybe. How just feel like if you're the guy who hired all the guys they're firing, maybe you're part of the problem. I don't know, though.
I was half expecting McCarthy to ascend into the GM level and leaving his head coaching prospects for GM and just, well, I'm not going to be GM anymore, but I'm going to be making personnel changes now. So yay. And everyone, and like every Packers fan just like face palms. Like you can just like hear it.
Right.
The other thought I had, and if this is dumb, you can, just tell me it's dumb or anything. But I was thinking that they might not have fired McCarthy because there's so many openings and only so many decent coaches out there that McCarthy's probably better than some of these coaches that are going to get paid big money. So
yeah,
maybe
it's kind of. I mean, John Gruden already basically got, like, I don't know, it hasn't been announced yet, right?
Not formally, no.
Right.
But so he's been putting together a staff for a week, but they have to do that whole Rooney Rule thing and make it look like it.
Yeah, so they're going to, I don't know, interview Reggie McKenzie for the head coach job that he's already the GM of. But, I don't know. But, and some people are talking about the Raiders, like they should get a waiver for it because they've been like so progressive as an organization over the years.
What?
Which like, I mean,
fine. Al Davis did a lot of good and a lot of things to like poke the bear of the NFL. Yes, that is accurate. But
right, and he hired a female like president, and he put black coaches into positions that never been. But that's like not the same. Like, then prove it. Like it's so ridiculous to me.
No, and you can sit and argue the merits of the Rooney Rule all day, but the fact of the matter is that it is the rule in the NFL, and you can't just go out and do what they're doing. Like it matters because it exists. Like.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a dumb justification, but like, there's no other way to put it with the Rooney Rule.
Right. Yeah. So evidently he's going to get like north of like $10 million a year, which is probably the only way you can pry him from that booth. But that's gonna suck.
And rumored a part of the team, like a percentage of the team.
That's how you really get somebody out of a booth.
Yeah.
Wow, that creates some like weird, interesting, probably conflicts of interest.
There's a lot there's a lot of things there. Because if he gets a part of the team, can you have him return to the booth for any like extended period of time?
No, I don't think you can.
I would argue that you couldn't, but I mean, we live in a society now where apparently this no longer matters. So who knows at this level or many others far higher? Like apparently conflicts of interest just don't exist anymore. So we'll see.
Right. I mean, I would potentially say, Mike McCarthy's a better coaching hire for the Raiders than Gruden is. So that's fair. And then, some teams are going to, a team already extended Hugh Jackson. So they've essentially decided to hire a worse player. And also, you see, and this is probably to only fulfill Rooney requirements, but the Bears, in addition to, and we've got this in the show notes already, I'm kind of jumping the gun, but in addition to interviewing Pat Shurmur, also interviewed or planned to interview George Edwards, which I guess go for it.
That's a thing.
Yeah, that's. I don't know if you feel like the Rooney Rule is like you just got to get one minority interview in there. I don't know if I'd go with a guy that is not going to offer me any benefit to interview. Like, he would be such a weird hire for anybody because it's very clear how little control he has over the defense, which is not to say, he's not a part of it or anything like that. But, everyone kind of is aware of the level of control Mike Zimmer has over the defense. And so it'd be kind of like hiring a linebackers coach to be your head coach, which is not impossible or anything, but it's raises an eyebrow here or there. I don't know.
Well, Mike Singletary was a coach for a while, so it's not like there's not precedent for it. It just doesn't make any sense, and it didn't really make much sense for Mike Singletary either, despite the fact that his sound clip is the very end stinger of our show.
Right. Dude, what a weird coaching career that guy had, because when he was fired in San Francisco, there were a bunch of people, I think, with pretty reasonable takes that they were like, give him he's going to coach position-wise for a while. But I think by the end of his tenure in San Francisco, I think he kind of got a handle on it. And, he did a pretty decent job with Vernon Davis, as much as everyone criticized him at the time. Right. And Vernon Davis later credited him for turning him around or whatever. So, maybe he could turn into a good head coach. And then he was just bad at everything.
just awful. It's he ended up in Minnesota for a little bit too.
Yeah, which was so weird, because everyone was like, what does he do here exactly? He helps coach the linebackers.
He's our linebackers coach.
But what does Fred Puckett do here then? He's the linebackers coach. You named him the linebackers coach. It's like, Singletary's not the linebacker coach, but he's like a consultant.
He's a consultant in the same way that Brad Childress was a consultant for the Chiefs for a while when they'd show him up in the booth next to the offensive coordinator. He wasn't actually the offensive coordinator. He was just a consultant. He was the guy who made sure that Andy Reid got all of the barbecue menus away from the press when he would go up and speak. That's all.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it was just so bizarre, especially when you did see in training camp when Puckett and Singletary were coaching the linebackers. And it was kind of the opposite of what you expected, where Puckett was the one who was yelling and he was like, my grandmother could block better than you, or whatever, right? And Singletary is like, come on, man, you could do this. I believe in you. And
so they were playing a game of good cop, bad cop?
Yeah, but they didn't have any rhythm, and so they were just working to opposite ends. It was just really bad. I think and I think that was probably the worst year the linebackers were coached too. You take a look year by year.
Improv classes could have helped.
Yeah, right, exactly. They needed, hashtag chemistry. And then they promoted him out of that position to just be a floating assistant the year after that. And everyone asked so what does he do? And he's like, well, he's an assistant. It's what, he grabs you coffee? And it's no, that would be the meeting.
No, that's an intern.
Yeah, right. And so he never had a clearly defined job. And then I think he still has an NFL job somewhere, but still no one's sure what he does.
He gets paid, and that's important.
Yeah.
Good for him. So the Lions, Cardinals, Giants, and Bears are expected to be interviewing offensive coordinator Pat Shermer. No AFC teams, though. So this is gonna end up haunting us, right? This is gonna be the end of the world.
I'm not super excited about him coaching the Bears.
I'd prefer a Bears team with an offense that, let's just say, is Cutler-esque.
Yeah, it's the Bears I know and love.
We've grown accustomed to it.
Right. I don't I think that's just kind of a random thing. I'm sure it's not AFC teams just haven't been enlightened to the fact that it's pretty improbable that Case Keenum, Latavius Murray, and Jerick McKinnon could put together a top half offense. But I think that you're kind of right. If it's the Cardinals, it's probably not going to bite them because they don't play them that often, and they essentially the Cardinals would have to make the playoffs, and I feel at this point they're pretty far away from making the playoffs because they don't even have a quarterback on the roster. That can change basically any year, but at the moment, it's not a huge issue. Maybe he takes Sam Bradford with him, or even Case Keenum. Both of them are free agents, and if he takes Case Keenum with him and Keenum continues to perform at this level, then it could bite the Vikings. But the Bears that one just worries me a lot, and it seems. I don't know, we had Marxist Panther on the show, whose last name I forgot, but his first name is Scott. Nice guy. We had him on to preview.
He did a lot of promoting of the clip show. That was nice of him. He enjoyed that
prominently in it. Yeah. But he helped us preview the Carolina Panthers game. And he made the prediction that Pat Shermer was going to coach the Bears, and we were like, yeah, we know, that's what we've been worried about. And it's happening. There's three other teams and the Bears haven't made a final decision or anything like that, but I'm just so worried about it because I feel you can kind of I don't want to say throw away his like tenure with the Browns as a head coach, although I think he was the best coach the Browns have had in that stint, like with Chudzinski and Pettin and now Hugh Jackson, who I really thought was going to be like a knockout coach. I thought he was going to be really good for the Browns, relatively speaking.
If you watch any of the Baldy's breakdown tweets when it comes to a Browns game,
kind of tough for me to watch.
Yeah, those are but watching the ones about the Browns, he just lights them up every time. There was one in particular where the safety was literally 30 yards downfield on a 1st down and 10. And it was a handoff. It was a run play, and it had every indication of being a run play. And he's just like, what the hell is he doing 30, 35 yards off the line of scrimmage? And it ended up being like this 8-yard run up the gut. And it's just like, what was he seeing here? What was he trying to be doing?
That's so great.
Like, if I could find it again, you can't, because Baldy's breakdowns are just like nearly every play, and it's just well done. But man, it's his breakdowns of the Browns games are just amazing. Like, there's so many just coaching issues on that team. Clearly, the team's got talent. It's just they don't know where the hell they're going.
Right. Yeah, so I'm looking it up, and under Sherman, the Browns had, I think, the best point differential since, I think, Romeo Crennel. So you can throw away sort of his time with the Browns and say that the Browns, it's not really fair. But if you did want to take a look at his time with the Browns, it's not bad. It's not terrible.
They win a game?
Yeah, they won 5 of them in his second year.
Wow. That's 4 more than the last 2 years.
Yeah. So yeah, he's done all right with the Browns, and he had to deal with having Trent Richardson on his offense and Brandon Weeden. So given all that, like, you could say, there's you can, maybe you don't have to worry too much about his time with the Browns as indicative of his future play. As an offensive coordinator has always been kind of interesting. You wanted to see what he was going to do when he was an actual offensive coordinator and not just like a guy under Chip Kelly, just kind of like what's happening with George Edwards now. And obviously he's done a really good job, and I think he's probably learned a lot. And I'm sure he's actually going to be an interesting head coach kind of guy. The only issue is that it's probably a fallacy that good coordinators make good head coaches and stuff like that, and we just kind of always assume it's the case that good coordinators make good head coaches, where with Mike Zimmer that has turned out to be the case, but with so many people it hasn't. So I'm always a little bit worried about talking about it like that, but still, it's something. It's something to like think about, that like, hey, he would be the kind of person that would, turn Mitchell Trubisky into a potentially threatening quarterback. I don't want to roll too hard there.
You're like, these words are recorded and could easily be played back during a horrible moment of that he would have as a coach or as a quarterback. So, I kind of wanted to see Sherman attempt to right the ship over at the Colts. That could have been an interesting fit. I know that the Colts have either already interviewed or are scheduled to interview the offensive coordinator for the Patriots, whose name is McDaniels. Yes,
Josh McDaniels. Yeah. So
like they're already planning to do that, but that could have been an interesting hire. That could have been an interesting fit for him. And it's not, clearly they wouldn't. There's clearly a quarterback that's supposed to be playing there. Maybe. Maybe. I mean, I think Uncle Chaps was the one who tweeted, McDaniels has lots of great experience with working with backup quarterbacks. He'd be a great fit there. Like cold. Ice cold. But yeah. It would have been interesting to see him potentially move to the AFC.
That would have been pretty cool. Just get him out of the NFC North at least, man.
Yes, please. If you're going to take him, fine. Just move him elsewhere. And, maybe if this whole Gruden thing ends up being a wash and it turns out just to be one big plot to get a bunch of money from ESPN, which kudos if you're able to do it, maybe he ends up over in Oakland.
Yeah, wow. That would be... If Gruden does this for I think it's the third time where he's leveraged coaching interest into a contract, but I don't think he's gotten to the point where he's leveraged confirmation of him coaching into a new ESPN contract. But if he does that...
Trey Wingo, come here. I need you to help me with something. Schefter, can you tweet this?
Right, yeah, exactly.
You owe me, bro.
It's just that would be out Revising Revis's holdouts.
Yeah.
Just an incredible money move. And then they get, Pat Shermer, who, maybe you could think of him as the good version of Bill Musgrave. And they've had experience with Bill Musgrave. So
you see, he's now the official offensive coordinator for Denver. Dusty is thrilled.
Yeah, right, exactly. I want to get Dusty's thoughts on Josh McDaniels, too.
We'll have to do that next week when Dusty is fully recovered from his purple beer experience.
Right. Yeah, he tweeted out, what was it, this morning, last night?
It was this morning, yeah.
Yeah, that his purple pale ale is completed.
And quite well, and is either at 6% alcohol or 30. He wasn't sure, but he and I talked early this morning, so he seemed somewhat coherent. So it couldn't have been that bad. So
it's probably closer to 6% then.
Yeah, probably. So that's going to be it for talking about the coaches, but we do have to talk about the playoff games that are happening this weekend, especially since the NFC games are going to determine who ends up going to Minnesota and playing at US Bank Stadium. So let's talk about the Titans and Chiefs game real quick. Is there a team in the playoffs that is as underwhelming as the Titans?
The Bills?
No. That's a mistake by God. The Titans, however...
That's an example of good players overcoming extraordinarily bad coaching, kind of. I just feel with the players that they have, I think Marcus Mariota is genuinely talented. I think they've got some really interesting options among the receivers. Their offensive line should be better than it is, and it's not actually performing all that poorly. They've got two friggin' really good running backs, and their offense is whatever, right? Take every element of the offense. The tight end is really good. It's one of the most underrated tight ends in the league.
I was going to say, can you name a player besides their running back and quarterback on their offense?
Well, they've got Corey Davis and Delaney Walker, but that's the problem, right? Yeah. Is that those names don't sound overwhelmingly good, but they are. Delaney Walker is a top 5 tight end, or maybe not this year because we've just had an influx of really talented tight ends.
It certainly was last year.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And he's great, and among really good receiving tight ends, he's a really good blocking tight end. He's much better than Greg Olsen or friggin' Jimmy Graham, right? He's not Gronk level good at blocking, but he's really good. But the coaches just don't use that offense very well. I feel that defense is kind of the same, where they've got a bunch of talented guys and no one really to lead them. Maybe they've got some issues with their linebackers, but whatever, right? It's a really poorly coached team that kind of managed their way into the playoffs against a team whose coach has a history of surprisingly bad coaching decisions in the final 2 minutes, but is otherwise regarded as just a really good coach and has been a pretty good coach despite the Chiefs kind of falling off over the past 6 weeks.
Falling off might be an understatement. They've limped into the second half of the season and have now just they're being dragged. Their lifeless corpse is being brought into the playoffs.
And yet they're probably going to win. What, they got they're -9 in Vegas, right?
Yeah. No one respects the Titans, and for good reason. But Titans and Chiefs.
I did Titans +9, but I just couldn't do Titans money line, which I know it's effectively the same thing, but I'm trying to imagine a world. But I can see +9.
It's kind of feasible,
right?
So I think we both have the Chiefs pulling this one off. Maybe it's a situation of getting their groove back and making it to the next round, but woof.
Yeah, it's like I trust a lot of their essential pieces, kind of. I mean, like no one can truly trust Alex Smith, but I mean, kind of. And I trust their coaching to kind of pull things together. That's just not true for the Titans.
No. So the Bills and the Jags. The Bills are in there thanks to a gift from Andy Dalton, whose
Which
foundation
they paid back kindly, like $100,000 worth of donations to his foundation.
Yeah,
like,
his foundation has been doing quite well in the past few days.
Yeah. So
good for them against a Jags team that is sacking the quarterback at a rate much faster than their quarterback can be running, or their quarterback can be throwing interceptions.
Right, yeah, just the sacks are beating out the interceptions, which is fantastic stuff.
That is a stat you want.
Yeah, right. What's really funny is like 2 years ago, it'd be like, yeah, it's a Bills-Jags game, and you're like, wow, that's awful, that's terrible, no one wants to watch that. And it's like, yeah, it's a playoff game.
Just like, will there be liquor involved?
But I mean, like the Jags are genuinely interesting this year. It's like one of those cases where, and unfortunately, I think the second half, their defense has only been like really good instead of like dominating like in the first half of the season. And they've got like strength of schedule concerns. Like I think it's kind of interesting. You take a look at the Vikings defense and the Jaguars defense, and I think the Vikings are number 1 in points allowed, but number 2 in points per drive. Maybe if you adjust it for opponent, the Vikings are number 1 in points per drive, but then they're number 2 in like drive success rate or something like that. And so they're pretty close. But the Vikings really only got there over the past like 3 or 4 games. And I'm saying only because it's kind of important to point out that a lot of this has to do with, I think, the Jaguars defense kind of falling off, but not like falling off. Like, it's not like Chiefs falling off, right? It's just like, well, they're not amazing. They're just very good. And I kind of want to see what that means. Like if they can be the proto example, like, because we haven't really seen, I mean, I guess you could say the 2015 Broncos, but we haven't really seen like a 2000 Ravens style, like just god awful on offense or amazing on defense Super Bowl winner. And it would be really funny.
You had to add Super Bowl winner. I was going to say the Tebow led Broncos as an example of a playoff team with a god awful offense that beats a really good team in the playoffs.
Right, yeah, exactly.
How is a team that has started Nathan Peterman in the playoffs? Like, how is that a thing?
They've got like a negative 56 point differential. It's just so like the thing. It's just so mind boggling. So I'll say this though. Really fantastic story from a bunch of different elements. They had the longest playoff drought in the history of the league since 1999, and they make the playoffs, which I just fantastic. And they kind of like embrace who they are at the same time. Like, I can't wait to jump through a table during the playoffs, like, which is just a super funny. So like, that's really cool that they're like really true to their like hilarious fan base. And like you could see the Bills players like in the locker room watching the Bengals game and seeing that final touchdown throw to Tyler Boyd, and them like, like some of them breaking down in tears. Like Kyle Williams has been with the Bills his entire career, one of the most underrated tackles over the course of his career. Honestly, could make a case for being on an all-decade team if it wasn't for someone like Ndamukong Suh, right? It's just really phenomenal player. Has never been in the playoffs. Been with the Bills for like 12 years, so like really fantastic. And then, Bills fans, they respond by donating to Andy Dalton's like foundation. That's just such a good story. In reality, they're not a good team.
No, in reality, they will likely be losing to Jacksonville.
Right, and again, that's not as bad as it sounds. Jacksonville's kind of an interesting team this year, but still, I mean, you're going to be losing to Jacksonville. And I think it's like I don't think it's as severe. Like, what is it, like 6.5 points?
Yeah, it's not a huge spread, but it's it's still expected. Let's just put it that way.
Whatever it is, I took the under, which is 39.5 points.
Also
and
probably
it's crazy.
smart.
Right. It's crazy. I think the Bills, everyone is like, they were trying to tank the season, and I agree with them. And then like a bunch of people are like angry, like, see, we weren't trying to tank. And it's like, well, your front office was. The players obviously weren't. Like no players trying to tank, like, obviously. But the front office was. Like, they got rid of Sammy Watkins and they added Kelvin Benjamin. Like, what are you doing? And they were clearly like stockpiling picks and getting rid of players, and it was just really bizarre what they were doing. And then and you're like, oh, well, when you think about it that way, like the front office kept on making like decisions that were clearly aimed towards the future and sacrificing the present. When you think about it, like, oh, they made the playoffs, then you think, oh, that must have been a really good job by the coaching staff. But they made the worst coaching decision this year out of any team, which is to bench Tyrod Taylor for Nathan Peterman. Like, what? I have no idea.
It might have made sense after a concussion, but that's really about the only time that decision makes sense.
Right. And it's like 5 interceptions, and then they pulled him, right?
Who's the Jets' backup quarterback that was drafted early that has yet to see an NFL
Christian
game?
Hackenberg?
Yeah, it's like starting him right now. It's just not done in polite society.
Well, yeah, so here's the thing. Like, that's how bad it is. Like, because for all of the problems the Jets have had with their coaching, and I think Todd Bowles is a good coach. He's done a really good job with a really talent-depleted Jets team this year. But all the problems they've had with the coaching over the years, which includes, Rex Ryan and all that, they never once started Christian Hackenberg, right? Like, you got to give them credit for not starting Christian Hackenberg and not signing Tim Tebow and then starting him. Like, oh, good. That's great. I mean, they did sign him, but they didn't start him, right? Because they were like, in practice, they were just like, this is awful. What is this?
Like, he throws worse than Jared Allen does. We can't do that. Right.
And so you got to give him credit for that. But the Bills, in a similar situation, were like, yeah, that guy. Let's start him.
The guy with paste around his mouth? Yes. That guy. We're going to start him.
Right. So, it's clearly not good coaching and not good front office management. It's just sometimes stories need to happen, I guess, or I don't know. Either way, Jacksonville by like 7 or whatever.
Yeah. Which would then put Jacksonville against Pittsburgh, I believe. And then lowest seed would be Kansas City against New England.
Wow, rip.
That would be that's a buzzsaw game right there. I have a feeling that the team that Kansas City is now is not the team they were week 1.
Not the same team.
No.
Yeah.
New England's not going to be caught by that crap again.
Yeah, right. Like a lot of it was offensive innovation. Plus, the Patriots have gotten better on defense every week. I mean, they were just awful on defense for like the first, month and a half of the season.
Those of us who drafted their defense are very well aware of that. I got negative points a couple of weeks.
Jesus. But they're a much better defense. And, I mean, does Belichick ever get tricked by the same thing twice? Like, probably not. So,
probably not. And so Jacksonville would end up in Pittsburgh, and that...
Yeah, I give that to Pittsburgh.
I would give that to Pittsburgh, which then leads to an AFC Championship game of New England and Pittsburgh. So,
of an actually interesting game.
Yeah. You got to wait a few weeks. But I'm telling you, end of January, you're going to be enjoying that AFC Championship game.
Right, exactly. I'll be honest. If Jacksonville makes it to the AFC Championship game, no matter how poorly they play in it, I'm going to enjoy the hell out of it.
Yeah.
That's going to be great.
That should be good. So let's talk about the NFC, since that has relevance to us. The first game is going to be Atlanta at the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, so I think...
That's a fun one. That's a fun one to watch.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm kind of curious about... we talked about it before the Rams game about how Jared Goff has been really good against very bad teams, better than good quarterbacks usually are against bad teams, and pretty bad against good teams. And it's just like I think I may have mentioned this on that preview show too, but like it reminds me of when I was a debater. Me and my debate partner would be really good against very bad debate teams and just really awful against really good debate teams. So people didn't know what to make of us. It turns out we weren't very good. But like,
as it turns out,
right. But it's just like it's frustrating just to like see this pattern, and I feel like they may have bucked it over the past couple of weeks, which I think makes it like for a really sort of interesting matchup. The Falcons to me are a team that I think Matt Ryan in particular is kind of the opposite, I think, of Keenum, where I think he's kind of suffered from a lot more bad luck than I guess, quote unquote, he has a right to. And I think that he's playing at a level higher than his statistics indicate. When you pair that with someone like Julio Jones and a defense that should be better than it is, that's a pretty interesting game.
They didn't lose many pieces. It's not like their defense fell apart the moment the Super Bowl ended.
Yeah, right, exactly. Maybe Vic Beasley should be playing better than he is or whatever. This is a game, I think the Rams are favored by 4 or 5 points. I don't know. But I would take the Falcons and maybe even the Falcons to win outright, even though they're on the road. But whatever it is, I'm taking I think it might even be +6 in some books.
I wouldn't understand a +6 in that sort of situation, but boy, it's hard for me to see a situation where unless Atlanta outcoaches the Rams, I just don't see the Rams losing this one. I think the Rams are built a bit like the Vikings are this year, and we gave Atlanta just the worst trouble they had all season. I don't know. I could see the Rams pulling this one off.
Okay, so I looked it up. The Rams are 6.5 point favorites. That's a lot.
That's a lot of respect. Why are you giving them the home field why are you giving them the home field points? Like, just for playing at home, you get like what, 2 or 3, and you're playing in a stadium that is not going to be filled with Rams fans.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it might be that Atlanta's traveling all the way to the West Coast, although traveling westward is not as bad for road teams as traveling eastward is.
No, traveling eastward is way different.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah. Honestly, I don't want to say the Falcons are due or anything, because they're not. And like you mentioned, the coaching is not what it was when Kyle Shanahan was the offensive coordinator with Sark there. Sean McVay is a good coach, but I think that and there's a really good video about how the Vikings dismantled the Rams offense. Again, Brett Coleman. We promote his videos like every other week here. But it kind of demonstrated sort of the problems of having a young coach. And I think that this is kind of one of those situations where Atlanta can pop one off. I think I took them money line and I took them +6.5. Fake dollars, because gambling is illegal.
Exactly. This podcast should not be construed as gambling advice.
Right. So I think the numbers are telling me that the Rams should really win, even after you account for kind of like the way the ball is bounced poorly for the Falcons. But I just feel like the Falcons are the better team.
Could you argue that both of these teams are in a situation where they overachieved and found themselves at a party that they don't necessarily belong at? Maybe not as much Los Angeles, but Atlanta, it feels like just sort of lucked into the situation.
I think they're both kind of punching above their weight by making the playoffs.
That's what I was. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. They're punching way over their weight here.
Right. I mean, I think they're both, especially Los Angeles, are performing better than maybe what their true talent level is, which makes them kind of hard to gauge when they actually play against each other. I don't know. I just feel like with Freeman healthy again and Julio about to go off and a defense that like exists, they'll do enough to staunch the bleeding when they're on defense, especially I think Trufant's going to be healthy, that they'll be able to just kind of do more on offense. I'm going to go against Vegas on this one.
It'll be interesting. And then Carolina versus New Orleans. So
New Orleans is going to crush them.
Oh, yeah.
Are you not as sure as I am?
I'm not as sure, just because this year has been the reemergence of the New Orleans defense, which if you want to call it a reemergence, I guess. I don't know if it ever existed before, but outside of like 2009.
Yeah, they had a Rob Ryan defense, which in the tradition of Rob Ryan defenses was good for 1 year.
Exactly. So, boy, I'm not 100% sold on it. I still think that Carolina can move around, but boy, the pieces of Carolina just don't fit well against that New Orleans team. So
yeah, I definitely get that. So the thing that's like very striking to me about the Saints team is, so to me, who the Saints actually are characterized by, I think, two things. The first is the emergence of Marshawn Lattimore as a top-tier cornerback. And the second is when they traded away Adrian Peterson, they refocused their offense around Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara, and to some extent Michael Thomas. In games where since Adrian Peterson's been traded, where Marshawn Lattimore's been healthy, they've had like an 11.5 point differential. Like they've been dominant in games where they've had sort of all three of those elements. And if you only look at how Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram have produced since trading away Adrian Peterson and prorate it to a full 16-game season, those running backs have produced over 3,200 yards from scrimmage. Just those two players. Playing the same position. It's not like a receiver, right? Where two receivers can get 10 targets or whatever, right? They're playing running back where the touches are just so limited. In those games, I think Alvin Kamara's had 1,300 yards from scrimmage, and Mark Ingram has had like 1,100, and that's only in 12 games. And defensively, they've been just stellar. And so in those games, they've only lost sort of, I think, 2 of those games, and by very small margins. They've won some games by pretty large margins. I just think that that's the New Orleans team that we're going to see in the playoffs, unless, of course, Marshawn Lattimore's not healthy, and it sounds like he's just going to be, right? Because he's been playing for like the past 4 weeks and playing at a really high level. That's the team I think we're going to see, and that team has the best point differential in the NFL, has the best DVOA. Football Outsiders is DVOA in the NFL. The best, yards per play differential in the NFL. I think they have in those games they have the best points per, or the second best points per drive differential behind the New England Patriots. It's just a really good team, and I know what you're saying about this matchup problem with the Panthers, but I just don't think the Panthers can get anything done on offense, even if Cam Newton's playing at a really high level, because I just don't think those receivers are any good. No,
it's hard to look at a situation where, like, I think it's going to be a lot closer than it should be, like than the other games this weekend. But which would you rather? And I'm looking at it also from the standpoint of the Vikings. Would you rather be the Vikings and have Cam Newton come into Minnesota running all around, which we have a problem with mobile quarterbacks. We've always had a problem with mobile quarterbacks. That's why Aaron Rodgers owns us when he's outside of the pocket. Or would you rather see New Orleans come in with a team that is run-based primarily, but still has the arm of Drew Brees behind them?
Also, I'm nervous about the Panthers, and so my emotional reaction is to be kind of scared of the Panthers. I mean, they already beat the Vikings, right? But just overwhelmingly, I just think that analytically the Saints are just a much tougher team for the Vikings to play against. And the Vikings, I think that them playing against the Saints week 1 is totally irrelevant for so many reasons.
Completely.
So I think that Saints team is just a lot better. I would much rather play the Panthers team, despite the weakness the Vikings have had against that style of offense, against mobile quarterbacks in general. I think they would take care of the Panthers, especially once they get to play at home now. The Saints, I'm just not as confident. I think they're better than the Saints. I think they'll probably win against the Saints, but it's not the same. I'm a lot more nervous about a Saints game.
Yeah. So if we were to go with your prediction of Atlanta winning and New Orleans winning, Atlanta would then go to Philadelphia, which would be an interesting game. Not great, but interesting. Boy, everybody sleeps on the Philadelphia defense, but man, there's just not much of an offense to be had at the moment. Or at least the way they were playing. And then that would put New Orleans in Minnesota, January 14th.
Yeah.
That dome, regardless of who's playing it, is going to be loud, but that dome will be shaking. You will be able to hear that all the way to St. Cloud.
Yeah, for sure. That game would be phenomenal to attend. I think more than any other potential matchup.
Yeah.
It would just be a stunning atmosphere.
And if we're gonna make a Super Bowl run, it would be nice to slay a past demon from years past. It would be nice to just take care of that on the way to playing in a home Super Bowl. Just throwing that out there.
So satisfying.
Be a certain level of satisfaction, like watching the Seahawks miss the playoffs on a Blair Walsh kick.
People responded. People responded to me retweeting that by saying, they would have missed the playoffs anyway because it was like the second thing they needed. The Atlanta Falcons, they won. And they needed the Falcons to lose and for them to win. I was like, I don't care. This is hilarious.
No, at what point does it matter? It doesn't. What matters is that that nice little pointing at us in the preseason game. That's all that really matters during any of this. It's like, oh, yeah, things went so well for you. How was the playoffs this year? Are you going to be hosting people? Are you going to be having crock pots all day? Like, what are you doing?
Man,
are you going to be watching at B-dubs? Like, how are you hanging this? How are you doing this one?
I don't know, man.
You going to be over at Russell Wilson's place drinking all his bubble water? Like, what are you doing? Rubbing it on his feet? Like, what are you doing? I get the feeling you're not playing in the playoffs this year. I'm kind of. It's not super common to be cutting players after a week 17 performance, but I am kind of surprised they didn't make an exception to the rule and literally leave him off the team bus.
Well, I mean, what message does that send to the next kicker? You don't want to pre-nervous your next kicker, right? Like, you don't want to create anxiety before you hire the next guy.
I disagree. I feel like that shows that that shows a level of job security that that you can have in this. Like, well, I couldn't do worse than the last guy. All we needed to was to win one of these, and even we would have been in the playoffs. And he missed two, and we lost the games as a result. Like, oh well.
Oh well.
Somebody added the Norse Code Twitter account with a little thing asking how we felt about the Blair Walsh miss, and actually included Blair Walsh in the tweet. And it's like, namaste, dude, don't at the players. There's no reason to be adding players. It's just dumb to be doing. It's mean. Like, there's no point. Can you not, despite the fact that we all get a little bit of a laugh at Blair Walsh missing that, can we not at him? He's got plenty of third grade classrooms to visit. He doesn't need to read his notifications. Yeah,
I've got a general rule against adding athletes, which has come back to bite me, of course.
Which we've covered extensively on the show.
The rule, yes, it includes ratting out people criticizing athletes, you snitches, but it also includes not adding players after they've had a bad game. They know. They don't need you.
Yeah, the only reason why you do that is if they're going to block you immediately afterwards, like the Jacksonville quarterback did.
Oh my God! Well, okay, so it's Blaine Gabbert that does it, right?
Yeah, it was Gabbert that did it. Bortles does not. Gabbert would, according to Uncle Chaps.
He blocked you for compliments.
Yeah, he'd be like, "Hey, just wanted to thank you for your support of the troops during the week. It was really important, you know." And
block.
Hey, saw you out on the street drinking the other day. Block.
Just, I don't know what he uses Twitter for.
I still think that the Uncle Chaps episode of Norse Code is one of the most criminally underlistened, underappreciated episodes we've ever done. That is seriously one of the funniest episodes we've ever had.
Yeah.
Including the part where we asked Uncle Chaps just how old Blake Bortles is.
The best was when Uncle Chaps named like the bar that Bortles always goes to.
Yeah. I forget if we had to edit that out. I don't think we did.
I don't think we did. No. Everyone knows though. I think it's like the Lemon Bar or something. Well, now I've said it. Just like some rando beach bar. Yeah. He just loves it.
Yeah, good for him. But yeah, this is just adding players is stupid unless they're going to do something funny like block you immediately afterwards. I feel like that should be the rule.
Adding Blaine Gabbert, funny. Adding nearly any other player, come on, don't do it.
Just act like you've been there before. Right. So we're approaching 2 hours now. So but we have a bit of a mailbag to go through. It's gonna be a bit of a condensed mailbag since we've gone a little bit long here. So first question I want to ask you, Arif, is from Teddy Roosevelt, who asks, "Who does Arif hate more, Case Keenum or Carson Wentz?"
Oh my God! Obviously Carson Wentz.
Yeah, that's not even a question. But Matt Fries asks, "Make Arif play FMK, F marry or kill between Carson Wentz, Case Keenum, and Chad Greenway."
Well, obviously, kill Carson Wentz. Not even close.
He's a good Christian guy. He's gonna make an honest woman out of you.
Great. Okay. Marry Case Keenum. And F Chad Greenway.
Wow.
Greenway's a good-looking dude.
Greenway also provided you with quite the birthday celebration one year. So I mean,
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Shobi Martin asks, of all the possible AFC Super Bowl representatives, who would the Vikings match up best against, and who would the Vikings match up the worst against?
The AFC guys?
AFC.
It's really just the Steelers or the Patriots, right?
From our preview, yes.
That's interesting.
We played the Steelers well. We got in our own way, but we played the Steelers well.
I would say probably we match up poorly against the Patriots just because they've got this particular pick your poison thing. Which, I mean, yeah, obviously the Steelers have like a multitude of weapons, but I think the Patriots just do a better job of like dissecting before the game which weapon is just going to happen to be effective. And if it's some dude on their practice squad, that's who they're playing and that's who they're going to beat you with, right? Whereas the Steelers are just like, yeah, it's going to be like Antonio Brown or Le'Veon Bell, maybe Juju Smith-Schuster, right? But, those are your options. Where like the Patriots, it's just like maybe it's Rex Burkhead, maybe it's James White, maybe it's Rob Gronkowski, maybe it's Julian Edelman, maybe it's Chris Hogan. Is he still on the Patriots? I have no idea. But like, it's like any of those guys. It's a guy that might not even be on the roster right now, and they'll be like, who'd be perfect at beating the Vikings, this Vikings team with this Vikings defense? Preston Parker. And you're like, he hasn't played in 2 years. Doesn't matter.
David Tyree might be the perfect person for this particular route.
Right. And so, and Tom Brady will immediately be in sync with that person. You don't have to worry about, chemistry or whatever. So, I think that matchup is worse. And I think in particular this defense, obviously it's, the best or the second best defense in the NFL. So it doesn't have like a ton of weaknesses. But I mean, it always feels like one part of the defense, for one reason or the other, isn't running at 100% in a couple of stretches of games. So in a couple of games, it felt like that was Xavier Rhodes this year. In a couple of games, that was Eric Kendricks. In a couple of games, that was Anthony Barr. In a couple of games, it was Trey Waynes. In a couple of games, it was Mackenzie Alexander. It happens, right? It's totally normal. It happened to the 2015 Broncos for sure. Definitely happened to the 2013 Seahawks. And I don't think the Vikings defense is as good as those two, but it's a good point that they don't always have to always be perfect for it to be a good defense, and I don't think the Steelers can take advantage of it in the same way the Patriots can. And so if they find out, like, oh, here's a great story. Bill Belichick found out that Julio Jones had a foot injury, not because it was on any official injury report or anything like that, but because when he was watching film, he saw that Julio either would not cut to his right or had a lot of trouble later in the playoffs cutting to his right. And so they kept on shading to his left to force him to cut to his right, where he was just much slower and had a lot of pain cutting in that direction. And it's like that detail, which other coaches have admitted like they would not have picked up on. Like, it's like that level of detail that just, like, it really worries me. Like, what? There's a secret injury Xavier Rhodes has, maybe. If he does, what is it? How are they going to exploit it? So that's
or they could have just watched, like, every game this year and gone, wow, he's gone out with a hip, or he's gone out with a
yeah, right, yeah.
like, oh, well, we know exactly where we need to go with that.
Yeah. So
by the way, to answer your question, Hogan, while he did miss 7 of the last 8 games due to shoulder injury, he is practicing this week. So he is expected to play. Also, Burkhead is practicing this week, too.
Great. See?
Yeah.
Any of those guys.
Connor asks, if the Rams win versus Atlanta and we play them, do you think the game earlier in the season helps or hurts us if we hadn't played the Rams?
You know, like versus not having played them?
Yeah.
I think it helps. Not because like it's good to have the confidence or whatever of knowing you've beaten a team. I think that's probably overrated. But the concepts that you're going to be studying on film are just going to be a lot familiar and a lot easier to implement in practice. So even if they had lost to the Rams instead of won, I think it would have helped. Just because you kind of know what you need to do on a kind of a more instinctive level.
Next question is from Brad Davis, who asks a rather simple question. Would you rather end up losing the Super Bowl by 1 point after going for a 2-point conversion and failing, or have the Green Bay Packers lose to the Patriots by the score of 49-0?
Oh, man.
I don't know.
Packers?
I don't like any situation where the Packers play the Super Bowl in our house.
I know.
Like, that's the thing. Like, even if they lost, fine. Even if they lost in humiliating, like, Denver versus Seattle fashion, it still happened. You can't undo that.
Yeah, but I mean, like, how happy have Atlanta Falcons fans been?
There's a lot of, like, antidepressant, like, drugs, like, just went up in the greater Atlanta area. Just usage of that just shot up immediately.
So I just feel like, I don't know, maybe Packers fans are particularly kind of annoying where it doesn't impact them as much.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just in a situation where there's more Packers fans like open around here, and there's just more people in Minneapolis. But I see them, and they're hurt this year, and I'm kind of okay with that.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe making a good choice for the Vikings losing by 1 point on a 2-point conversion.
I mean, it's not like we haven't lost Super Bowls before, so it'll be fine.
Right. Yeah, it'll be fine.
Mo Savi asks, should Harrison Smith be considered as an MVP candidate?
Depends on how you define MVP. Personally, I think the MVP should go to the best player regardless of position, and in that case, Harrison Smith is certainly a candidate along with Aaron Donald. I don't think any player is playing better than the two of them right now. So yeah, in that context, yes, but I don't think he's the most valuable player in the NFL from the perspective of like valuable. It's always a quarterback, and in this case, Tom Brady.
It was interesting to listen to people break down running backs as MVPs, and everyone seemed to forget about the Adrian Peterson MVP season.
Yeah, right. Which, I mean, part of that
outlier, yes, but
he had to set a damn record.
Yeah. he had to be just a few yards away from setting the record. He could have been the cool guy on the sidelines with the glasses. Just saying.
Plus, I mean, from a most valuable perspective, I think statistically there was another quarterback that year. That was probably Tom Brady again. That was more valuable. But Adrian Peterson deservedly got the MVP.
Yeah. It would be hard to do what he did coming back from an ACL to do that. Ted Glover asks, who is on your NFL Hall of Fame ballot not named Steve Hutchinson and Randy Moss?
I don't know.
I know
who the
my
finalists
answer.
are besides those two.
How are you? This is your job, isn't it? Like, how is this not something
I'm not
that...
a Hall of Fame voter, man.
Not a Hall of Fame voter, but I feel like... Or have you just been too busy defending the Case Keenum takes on Twitter that you haven't been following the NFL Hall of Fame?
I haven't actually been up on a bunch of NFL news just because I'm traveling all the time now. I've been traveling.
You've been traveling, which is also something to say. You know, you're in Florida now, so it's a little bit odd, but...
Right. I was on a boat for half the day today. Like, all I could do was like defend the takes because I couldn't like actually see the news. So I don't know who else
you
is
were on a
the Hall of
boat.
Fame.
It's, you know, what else can be said?
Yeah, look at me now. I'm going to look up the finalists. And I'll
while you're doing that, let me announce that I believe that Terrell Owens should be Terrell Owens would be the one that would be receiving my vote. You can get Randy Moss and Terrell Owens in the same class.
I promise it's allowed.
Yeah, it's totally allowed. It probably should have happened last year. And anyone who argues against Owens being in there because of character issues, I'd like you to rewatch that Patriots-Eagles Super Bowl. Just try. That's a big time performance by a wide receiver willing his team back to life in the biggest game of the year. I've mentioned it a couple times over the course of the show, like over the past few years. That is one of the more amazing things I've ever seen for a wide receiver to just like fight against both Andy Reid and Donovan McNabb's just idiocy. Just trying so hard on like one leg. So I would 100% be putting that as my Hall of Fame vote.
It's the guys I'm interested in are T.O., Kevin Mawe. I don't actually know how to pronounce his last name.
If he would have been a person that's worth our vote, we would know how to pronounce his name. Let's just throw that out there.
It's a good rule, yeah. Ray Lewis, who I kind of don't want to give him a vote because A, I'm annoyed by him, and B, over the end of his career, he was overrated, but he was genuinely the best linebacker in the NFL for a while, so I shouldn't do that.
Urlacher's in here.
Yeah, I don't see him as a first ballot though. Is the thing?
No, not a first ballot, but good.
Yeah, good. And I wouldn't. I feel like I'd rather vote, say, Brian Dawkins or Tony Baselli or Alan Faneca in Faneca. God, I'm so bad at this. But those are the guys I'm kind of interested in. That brings me at 5, and plus I've already got 2 votes for Randy Moss and Steve Hutchinson, so I have to cut like 2 people. Baselli was so good, but his career was kind of short. He was probably the most underrated tackle over that period of time. Brian Dawkins, I feel like, just should definitely be in, and it helps, I think, to have more safeties in the Hall of Fame because in the future it'll bring more safeties into the Hall of Fame. Plus, I think he's on the All-Decade team, and Troy Polamalu's not. And I feel like if you're on the All-Decade team, you kind of should just be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I would argue that. Yeah.
So, man, there's a lot of offensive linemen, but I'm okay with that. So I would take Brian Dawkins. Alan Faneca? How do I pronounce that name?
You're just gonna keep doing this, aren't you? We're gonna be off the air, and you're gonna be lying in bed going, Faneca?
I'm gonna look it up.
It's a bit like it's Reservoir Dogs as you're going through you think Mr. Wong, Mr. Chong. I don't.
All right, Dawkins, Steelers guard. How about that? Steve Hutchinson. Gonna skip Joe Jacoby for now. Probably deserving. Gonna skip Edge. Kind of deserving. Randy Moss. That's 5.
That is 5.
Damn, and I wanted to give it also to T.O. and Ray Lewis. Who do I get rid of to get Ray Lewis? I have to be Brian Dawkins again? Jesus.
I feel like a question like that was asked in a Baltimore courtroom.
Yeah, yes, I know who I'm voting for on the seniors committee, which sucks because I don't want to vote for a Packer, but I want to put Jerry Kramer in. But maybe if we could take Paul Hornung out.
Can we do that? Can we negotiate something like that?
I hope that would be the correct and proper thing to do. Paul Hornung is in the Hall of Fame because what he did in college, that's bullshit. There's a whole. I'm going to link a thing in the show notes as to why he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame.
The correct improper thing to do.
Yeah. Man, that's tough, right? Because I only get 5. Yeah. Can I get 7? Can you just give me 7?
So, Matt Beckendorf asks, why does Case keep underthrowing wide receivers since we can't count on pass interference calls during the playoffs?
I don't know why he's doing it. Someone mentioned that there's a rumor of Case Keenum being injured. This is the first time I've heard the rumor. And I was like, oh, if that's the case, that's maybe a pretty good explanation for why, in particular, the past 3 weeks, if not the past 6 weeks, have been kind of an issue. Where did you hear about it? I didn't want to be sources. I didn't want to be aggressive about it, but I want to know where he heard about it. And he never answered me. And so, maybe that's it. But I just feel like maybe also people are making an excuse. So maybe he's just regressing to who he is, because we saw this a lot in Los Angeles too. He did underthrow receivers deep.
That's possible. Terrible Friend, I like that name, on Twitter asks, what song would best be played over the 2017 Vikings highlights? Options could also include Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, like Luke Inman is so happy to throw over Vikings highlights. X Gonna Give It to You. There's a new A Perfect Circle song called The Doomed. I kind of like that for the moment. I mean, I feel like we're due for something here.
Well, that's kind of interesting. Is there, I feel like, okay, so obviously we're somewhat familiar with the film Eraserhead. Mm-hmm. There's got to be a song referencing or maybe even titled Eraserhead, right?
It could just be Hey Man, Nice Shot from Filter instead.
I do love the 90s. Yeah, this is not my realm of question. I'm very bad at this sort of thing. This is really more of a you thing.
This really is more of a me thing. As the big come down. I'm just waiting for it here. But yeah, who knows? The Vikings 2017, we certainly overperformed. We won a bunch of games we were supposed to. We're now in the playoffs and are favored.
Oh, wait, whoa. Tub thumping. You're knocked down. Never going to keep me down.
Are we really going to
We're pissing the night away. Yeah, totally. It makes perfect sense.
We're doing that because we're playing at home anyway.
Right.
All right. I'm in agreement. We can get some Chumbawamba in there. That's fine. Next question. I like this question, and this is something that was actually sent from the last show that I wanted to make sure got sent in for this one. John Belk asks, what would be your advice for someone wanting to move away from purely watch the ball game watching to understand the game a little bit more?
That's actually tough. A lot of people will just say, do it, or a lot of people will say just watch all 22. And sometimes without some assistance, you're just not going to be able to watch the all 22 all that well, and it's not going to be super easy. The easiest thing for me is to try and evaluate a player as if they were a draft prospect, and it'll force you to focus on that player, write up notes and stuff like that. And obviously, it's kind of nerdy as a football fan who doesn't have necessarily a job in football to start writing notes on a player or whatever. But if you get something that can help you evaluate a player, I think it's The Essential Wide Receiver by Jay Norvell. And there's also the Essential Offensive Line. That's a really good book too. That'll help you. Mostly they're to coach receivers, or offensive linemen, but they'll also help you kind of evaluate, what receivers or offensive linemen or whatever should be doing. If you get like a book like that and see kind of what they need to do, and then watch the All-22 by keeping that in mind, by looking at sort of what works for an offensive lineman and what doesn't, and all that. Like you get an understanding of like offensive linemen need to hit inside the pads instead of outside of them or whatever, then it'll be easier because you've got like a purpose, right? You're looking for a reason. You're not just kind of trying to absorb like what you can absorb. And I think that's maybe one problem that people kind of fall into, where, they look at the All-22 and to them, it's not that different than looking at the broadcast, or they're only looking to see maybe who's open, right? Which is useful, but not like really the elementary purpose of having All-22. So if you look with a specific purpose in mind instead of a very general purpose to kind of like have a conclusion come to you, then that probably helps. So you can like learn about route running, or you can learn about offensive line play, or you can learn sort of about running back vision. I don't have a good running back book to recommend, maybe because it's a particularly difficult position to coach, but that can help. Maybe I'll put some books in the show notes that might help with that too.
I really liked the book by it's Chris, and I can't think of his last name, but it was a Smart Football.
Oh, Chris Brown, yeah, he's fantastic.
Chris Brown. That was a really, really good book. I really enjoyed that one actually. I ended up taking a look at especially defense in a much different way. I enjoyed that.
I'll include that book too.
Let's go to Don from Ohio, who asks, the Vikings guaranteed Super Bowl win if Arif wears a custom-made sweatshirt with Carson Wentz's face on it, and underneath it says #1 fan. Also, he must wear NDSU Zubas and NDSU socks. Arif can never take off the clothes, even for a shower/bath, and he must wear them for an entire month.
I mean, everything except for the never take them off for a shower or a bath. It just feels like I'm just going to get sick and die of pneumonia or something.
Someone's gonna get sick at the end of this. That's all there is. That's all there is for that. I would do a lot of things. I would do a lot of that for the Vikings. I don't know if I'm willing to die. Man, that's a lot. I don't want to go to the hospital. Speaking of the NDS,
or not shower for a month. That sounds awful too.
Well, no, you could take the shower. You would just have to wear the sweater during it. So
right, but that's my point. Like, those are my two options: is to have and maybe get pneumonia in the middle of winter, right?
Yeah.
And have this wet set of clothing, including a sweater that just absorbs all the water, and I'll probably get sick. Mm-hmm. Or I don't take a shower for a month. Those are my two options.
I'm reminded of a Marge Simpson quote: "Someone's gonna get parasites." No, I don't know about that. But did you see that the Vikings signed that player that played for Concordia in Moorhead?
Concordia Moorhead instead of Concordia St. Paul, which we very often see. So he's a cobber.
Yeah, he's a cobber. So I mean, I could cheer for a Moorhead guy. I don't know if I could cheer for a Fargo guy, but I could cheer for a Moorhead guy.
Having attended multiple debate camps at Concordia Moorhead, I have some affiliation-ish with the college, so I'm okay.
I always liked their trophies. I thought that the debate trophies that Concordia had, like the big silver plates, I don't know if they did that while you were there.
They actually still do the plates.
Yep, the big silver plates, those meant more than the regular trophies for some reason. Like those meant something more to me anyway. Let's go with Stefan Coldhammer, who asks, over the holidays, my mother-in-law cooked a brisket inside. After my summer spent smoking foods, it was extremely disappointing. What is the most disappointing dish you have had this year? I think that the mother-in-law brisket just wasn't done correctly.
I mean, yeah. That's the explanation, yeah.
It clearly should have had... it clearly should have been done the way I've been doing it, which I actually I will admit I kind of prefer the brisket in the slow cooker now as opposed to smoked. I may have crossed that line. I'm fairly certain that if Andy Carlson hears that,
Yeah.
The meat mafia is going to get to me, but if done correctly, I tend to prefer it, and I like I like all the hot sauce I end up tossing onto it, and just the garlic stuff. But that and the dark beer, I don't know. What's the most disappointing dish you've had this year? You can just say it's turkey. It's fine. Just say it.
I'm not disappointed by turkey. I know what I'm gonna get.
I know what I'm about, son.
Yeah, like if someone serves me turkey, I'm like, oh, it's gonna be dry, and then I'm right. That doesn't mean I'm disappointed. Man, I
discovered this year that I'm allergic to eggs. So like I was a little disappointed, which is just it's not like throat close up egg, or throat close up after eggs, but like my body really doesn't enjoy the experience afterwards. So that's become a problem. It's like, oh, I really can't make that much anymore. Like,
how about this? That egg thing sucks, by the way, but I just remembered, so I'm cutting you off.
Anyway, back to me.
So my girlfriend and I took my girlfriend's parents earlier in 2017 to the Bachelor Farmer in the North Loop, which it's a really good restaurant. This is not like meant as a don't go to this restaurant. Most of our meal, in fact, almost the entirety of my meal was just phenomenal. It was like family style. You serve yourself, really, really good stuff. But they were like, hey, do you want dessert? And none of us were really feeling dessert, but this guy was like really sold on it. And so he kept on telling us, yeah, it's a really good dessert. You're going to regret not getting it, whatever. And we're like, okay, well, what is it? Right?
Your life will not be the same without it.
Right. And, the guy has been steering us in the correct direction all night. And so, we're like, well, okay, well, what is it? Because it sounds like he's talking about one specific dessert, not like a menu of desserts. And he's like, yeah, so it's an ode to corn. And we're like, what are you talking about? What? But all the stuff we've had today has been good. So we're like, maybe. And he's like, no, it's fantastic. So it's got cornbread. And I'm like, oh, I love cornbread. And it's got like a corn cracker. And I'm like, okay, weird, but sure, that sounds like it'll taste good. It might just be like a Tostito, but like that sounds like it'll taste good. And a corn soda. And we were like, what the fuck is a corn soda? What are you talking about? But the guy was like, this is just amazing. We're so happy we were able to do it. It's got local ingredients. And this is something we've been talking about doing for about a year. But, it's been difficult to, get around to doing and get all the parts. We have like a schedule. And we're like, okay.
Chefs are generally insane people. And Dusty would not disagree with that assumption, with that take.
And so the guy is like, no, you're going to love it. I promise you loved everything that you've had tonight. So just take it on faith. I'm like, okay. And he was doing a really good job selling it, right? And he brings it to us, and it's like the worst thing I've had in months. Like, it was just awful. Like,
it made the baby Jesus cry.
Right. And someone, I think my girlfriend was the one who said it. It tasted like the liquid from canned corn, but carbonated. Like, God. And that's pretty accurate.
Bubbly canned corn.
And like the thing is, now that I think about it, corn soda shouldn't be that difficult. Coke is mostly made of corn syrup, like corn syrup and water. Like, it shouldn't be that difficult, but it was clearly difficult. I will give him credit. It did taste like corn, but like not in a great way, and still carbonated. Like, it was just so bad. And the cornbread was bad too, just a surprise.
The corn soda is actually just E85.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this has been subsidized, and the blend has been approved by the state.
There were lots and lots of tax laws involved in the making of this corn soda. Lots and lots of lobbyists,
but
lots and lots of lobbyist dollars were put into place here, so you could enjoy this corn soda. Take it on faith. And like as he like winks, his like one of his teeth shows and goes ding. Like, this is going to be fantastic.
Why am I blind?
It's the glisten. As another Arrested Development thing happens, I got dragged to a Ruby Tuesdays.
I mean, they're not like terrible.
No, I hate Ruby Tuesdays.
Wait, what?
I hate Ruby Tuesdays.
Okay.
It's just, I don't know what it is, but I've never had a good meal there. I've never enjoyed myself. I've never thought to myself, you know what I should do with this coupon that I get in the mail every month from Ruby Tuesdays? I should use it and I should go have a good meal. No, I throw it away immediately. Like I've been to Ruby Tuesdays at least 5 times in my adult life, and every time I sit there going, I should be somewhere else.
I have not had that experience with Ruby Tuesdays. It's been all right.
It's been manageable. For chain, it's been manageable. No,
right, and the salad bar has always surprised me in a good way.
I don't know if I've had a meal there that's been halfway decent. I
think they have pumpernickel croutons, man. At least that's something.
I went to it wasn't this year, but I went to a Ruby Tuesdays in Fargo once by accident. I wasn't driving, so there you go.
Yeah, clearly, yeah.
We went to Ruby Tuesdays, and over the music that was playing over the speakers, I thought it was a little weird when Christina Aguilera's "Dirty" played, but it was in the mid 2000s, so I mean, okay, fine. But then it just kept playing, and it wasn't a jukebox thing. Like, the song played every other song for about 2 hours.
Ugh.
You needed a shower afterwards. Like, it was just off-putting. Just like walking around in your bathroom late at night with your socks on, and you stepped into where the kids' bath water was, and you just step into water and just, I'm not gonna get that dry. I got to take that sock off now. And I'm not saying that because the kid got a bath tonight, and I did just that. So that is going to be it for this week's episode. We will be back next week to preview whoever we're going to end up playing and talk about the games as well, and a mailbag. Arif, do you have anything to plug other than that Case Keenum article that's getting all the clicks and all the tweets?
I'm going to write about the Saints. I just think that they're such an interesting problem for the Vikings to have to solve that I kind of just want to write about them.
Just be even if they end up losing,
yeah, that's my worry. I'm thinking about waiting until, because it's already we're recording this on Wednesday. You're going to hear this probably on Thursday. You're going to have to wait until Friday to read the story, and then it's just if they lose, what are they playing on Saturday? If they lose on Saturday or something, that sounds dumb as hell.
I mean, why did he write about that? That doesn't make any sense at all. And actually, the Saints are playing on the Sunday game.
Oh, perfect. That's 2 days for people to read the article.
Yeah, and then you can just have your editors pull it.
Yeah.
USA. So that is going to be it for this week's episode. Again, if you've enjoyed the 2 hours that we've spent with you today, you can go to patreon.com/Norse Code, or you can go to paypal.me/Norse Code and give us a tree fitty, just something to keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, help keep the lights on, just help us remain ad-free. We appreciate all of the listens, all the assistance you guys have given us over the years. Again, thank you guys so much. But for Arif, for Dusty, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening, and continue to demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. And we will see you next week.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pogachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono, or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at Norse Code DN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. please visit our website, NorseCodePodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed
to NorseCodePodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.